Hi, everyone, and welcome to another round of Cut the Clutter with Confluence. This one a little delayed because I was so caught up with, the tech of future tech, AI, drones, robotics, space, that my team had to remind me that my first love is geopolitics. Fair enough, but the main thing today driving geopolitics is tech, with the tech billionaires practically orchestrating the whole world order. So, what are we covering today? Let's start with the conflicts in Gaza, in Sudan, Nigeria, Venezuela, and then move on to US's deals now, consequences later approach, covering negotiations with Xi, Modi, and then Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia this week. There's a lot to cover, so I will just highlight the main events and the global interlinkages in this edition and do detailed explainers for all of the conflicts subsequently. So, first, Gaza. We've been saying this for a number of months now that the Gaza ceasefire will hold, despite the Israeli airstrikes, increased tensions on the the Israel-Lebanese border, and the news of rearming of the Hezbollah. This is a managed transition that everybody is on board, and I'll put in some links of our previous videos. So the GCC are the main power brokers with their capital energy and energy capital, along with tech investments, driving the plan for regional stability. Jordan and Egypt have an alliance with the GCC. Iran and Saudi normalized via China in 1923 that led to Iran giving up its proxy strategy to suit the recalibrated realities of the region. So everything from the 12-day Iran-Israel war to the regime changes in Syria, in Lebanon, to the taking of hardliners on all sides, and then finally the Israeli strike on Doha have led to this. So what can we expect in the future? The ceasefire will hold, as I said, despite many hiccups, and the hiccups are actually many. Some sort of Arab security and economic architecture will emerge in Gaza and in Levant. Destabilization within Hamas and within Israeli politics, more power structures sort of emerging in Levant. So, for example, you saw President al-Shara, who was legitimized and whitewashed in the White House just last week, where his Al Qaeda sort of links in the past were just whitewashed. And then, of course, many spoilers on the way. But if Gaza is to reach some sort of stability, it means that the trillions of dollars worth the military industrial complex has to move somewhere else. And in the last few weeks itself, we saw three major escalations: Nigeria and Sudan in Africa, and Venezuela in Latin America. So let's start with Sudan. Now, people following the Sudanese conflict know that the human rights abuses and the humanitarian conflict that's been ongoing since 2023, when the two erstwhile partners in the coup that rocked Sudan in 2019 began infighting, the SAF and the RSF. Of course, the whole idea of gold resources, Sudan's ports linkages to the Red Sea, and vital trade routes that Sudan serves to rest of Africa have further inflamed the conflict. My question is, why so much media attention in a conflict that's seen human rights abuses, horrific ones, for a number of years? And I think it has something to do with the larger negotiations and the rebalancing of the power that's happening across the Middle East and in North Africa. Just to leave you with the thought, the Israeli and the Western American hands were weakened in the Gaza-Levant sort of negotiation because of their human rights abuses. And that's come to roost in Sudan, where the UAE, a vital part of the GCC and a major power broker, has been accused of genocide for gold narrative. So whose purpose is this leverage serving? More in the explainer. Moving on to Nigeria, where President Trump floated this seemingly insane idea of American intervention to protect the Christians of Nigeria from the Islamist insurgents, particularly the Boko Haram and the ISIS. Of course, there has been uptick of Islamist insurgency in Western Sahara, in countries like Mali. But President Trump's announcement serves, I think, two major agendas. He is one way appealing to his MAGA base, that are increasingly being fed the narrative of Christians and white US in danger to justify domestic and international policies. And secondly, it again seems a power conflict for a continent that's increasingly getting out of the Western hands. China alone invested $21 billion in its Belt and Road initiatives in Nigeria in October. So what is the US going to do? If it does escalate, it's going to be some sort of managed aerial strikes, maybe, because any further escalation will pit it directly against China, the Wagner interests of Russia, and the GCC, which is also looking at the continent as its sphere of influence with its favorable demographics, economics, and rare earth mineral resources. Now, moving on to Venezuela. So with the Nigeria and Sudan, the hope is that this is escalation for the purposes of de-escalation, that once the leverage and the power buyout and negotiations come to fruition, we might see some sort of revolution. Latin America is now in the battleground for the military-industrial complex, and that's how Venezuela fits in. You must have seen and heard in the news about the attack on the Venezuelan boat. Also, deployment of US troops under the narrative of sort of controlling the narcotics trafficking into the US. But there are 2 points that I'd like to sort of present here that will probably explain the underlying situation. Firstly, the discovery of oil in Guyana, which is bordering Venezuela, which has Chevron and Exxon's footprint all over it. And Venezuela's sort of claim to oil-rich Essequibo region in Guyana. Right. Also, within Venezuela, President Maduro has been curtailing the activities of Chevron. Yes, Chevron operates despite sanctions. And in the past, America has intervened in Latin American countries to protect its corporate interests. Let's see if this is the case again. And then the second one, it seems like it's an American message to the emerging Venezuela, Iran, and China triangle, where China buys the Venezuelan oil, Iran ostensibly provides tech, and Venezuela gives both these countries a strategic foothold in what is America's neighborhood. So what is the future? People say that the troops, American troops that are currently deployed, are too small for an actual invasion and too big for just a narcotics sort of trafficking operation. It seems like probably covert operations against the regime, but it seems like the banana wars are back to Latin America. And again, as I said, these are all part of a global negotiation for unipolarity versus multipolarity, and America's deals now, consequences later approach fits in perfectly with recent meetings with President Xi on the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea. It produced 5 key points of agreement, though a lot of them are already being abrogated, indicating that the sort of tug of war between the two superpowers will continue. So what were these 5 points of agreement? First, of course, on tariffs. The fentanyl tariffs were brought down to 10% and the general tariffs were brought down to 47%. There were agreements on easing restrictions on future tech, so on chips, semiconductors. China promised to remove the restrictions on the rare earth minerals, one of their strongest leverage in the entire trade tariff war with the US. And of course, they both agreed to collaborate on Ukraine, which I think is in the near future, not yet, because all sides have much to gain from a continuing escalation in the Ukrainian war. For the US, it's essentially controlling Europe, getting access to the rare earth minerals in Ukraine. For the Russians, it's more territory. And then for the Chinese, via all of the other players. So it's going to be a couple of months before Ukraine war comes to any of its fruition. Continuing with this, President Trump is also negotiating a trade and tariff deal with India. And the Crown Prince, Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is in the US this week with the demands for defense, for tech, for business, which the Americans will find it very hard to sort of not cave into, because that's the bargain for their plan to go through in Gaza and Levant. So we will cover that in the next Clutter with Confluence, but stay tuned for our explainers on Nigeria, on Sudan, on Venezuela, and on this emerging multipolar negotiations for the reshaping of the world. Thank you very much.